Hello, this is the next video in our series of how to build your apparel decorating business. We've started from scratch. We recommended that you start with a heat press and a vinyl cutter. There are other videos in this series if you want to go back to those to watch. As your business continued to grow, we recommended that you then advance to screen print transfers and super color. As your business continued to grow, we also showed you how to, or talked about how to acquire bulk orders and group orders and school orders and things like that. As your business continues to grow, we talked about that you're going to outgrow the screen print transfers, and that we recommended that you add screen printing to your business. As your business continues to grow, today's video is going to focus on what we think is the next logical step to add to your apparel decorating business, and of course that would be embroidery. Embroidery and screen printing, screen print transfer, super color, vinyl, cutting vinyl and putting it on shirts goes hand in hand with embroidery, because your landscaper comes in and he wants a couple dozen t-shirts for his workers. He needs a hat for each worker with an embroidered logo. He wants a few polo shirts for himself, so when he goes on sales calls, he will be wearing his polo shirt. Your office companies need embroidered polos. They might want embroidered jackets for their employees. They might also want to give away t-shirts, so they want those screen printed. So in our business, we received lots and lots of orders that would include both screen printing and embroidery. So embroidery just goes hand in hand with all the other services you have started. And so that's the next logical step. Now, we talked about in a previous video, if you would go back and watch the video about adding a contract decorator, that's critical. You don't want to just, I don't think anyway, just start doing embroidery and you've had no embroidery in your business before. I think previous to adding embroidery, you should be advertising that you do embroidery services, because you're sending that out to a contract decorator. We talked about getting that contractor decorator set up before you start advertising for it. And so then when that landscaper does come to you and he wants his 2 dozen t-shirts and he wants a dozen embroidered hats, you don't have to turn the hat part of that order down, because you have a contract embroiderer that can do that for you. So you continue to push that as a part of your business, but you're not actually doing it yourself. Your profit margin is not going to be as great because you're having to pay the contract embroiderer to do the labor, and then you're marking up the hats or polos or jackets or whatever. But as that part of your business continues to grow, at some point you want to bring those services in-house so you can make all of the money rather than sending that money to your contract decorator. So embroidery is the next step. You will have to make a judgment how much contract embroidery business are you doing, because embroidery machines come in several different configurations. Most people start with a one-head embroidery machine. And that may be where you want to start to kind of get your feet wet. I wouldn't be cutting off that contract decorator yet, because you're going to get some orders, particularly in the beginning when you're just kind of learning, that you either not going to know how to do or not really want to do. So any really what you might consider difficult orders or things like that in the beginning, you can still send out to the contract decorator as you're getting your feet wet and how embroidery works and all the ins and outs to it. But you may want to start with a one-head embroidery machine. The drawback is you can only do one garment or one hat at a time. So if somebody orders 48 pieces of a logo, it's going to be kind of a slow process. So like a 10,000 stitch logo, which is probably an average size logo for a left chest on a polo, maybe a little bit larger, but it's a typical stitch count for a logo. That might take about 12 to 15 minutes for you to do by the time you hoop the garment, get it on the machine, get it off the machine. So if you're looking at 48 pieces, you can do the math. You're only able to do about 4 or 5 an hour. So it takes some time to do. But if the business is obviously not there yet and you're wanting to build it, then that might be where you want to start. If your contract embroidery business is pretty large, then you may want to consider purchasing a multi-head machine, a 2 or a 4 head. They make them in other configurations, 8 heads, 12 heads, 16 heads, but I doubt in the beginning you're going to be in that range. So you're probably going to be looking at a 1 head, a 2 head, or perhaps a 4 head machine. I'd say most of you are probably going to be starting with a one head. And what you can do if you start with a one head is if your business starts incrementally, at some point you can add another one head, which gives you two heads. Then you can have another one head, and it gets you three heads. And then when you get to that point, you may be in a position to now, okay, we definitely need a four head, or maybe even move to an eight head machine. Now, here's the other thing about embroidery. A lot of embroidery is names and numbers and things like that. Even if you had an eight head machine, if you're doing names, you still can only do one at a time, because I can't put Joe on head one and Sam on head two. When you've got the multi-head embroidery machines, you can only do one logo at a time. And so, that's another thing to consider. So when you're adding one heads, in the beginning, that can be a good way to go, because they're cheaper than buying a multi-head machine. But if you was wanting to buy a four-head machine, you'd want to buy a multi-head, because that's going to be cheaper than buying four one-heads. But when you're just starting and you're growing your business, going from one head and adding another one head might be the way to go, because that's going to be cheaper than trading in your one head and buying a four head, if that makes any sense. Now, embroidery is a different skill set. You're going to have to be able to load the shirt straight, or hooping it straight, getting it on the machine, knowing what the functions on the machine are. And then, like screen printing, there are a lot of nuances about backings and the type of fabric you're trying to embroider on, and the locations. You'll get more, seeming to me, more weird locations with embroidery than you do with screen printing. But all those things can be learned with practice and experience. So embroidery is probably the next service we want to add to our business. In future videos, we're going to talk about the types of machines, as far as needles, how many needles you want on your machine. We'll talk a little bit about brands. We'll talk a little bit about what type of other types of things, like you need a hooping device, the magnetic hoops. There are things that are going to make your job a lot easier that you'll want to have as a part of your business. Hope this helps somebody as you try to make a decision. Well, where do we go now? Our screen printing business is really going good. What's the next step? In my mind, the next step is adding embroidery, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specifics in future videos. So I hope this helps somebody.